Good morning, Jenny.
Good morning. I'm
We
Laurie.
are here to do our new moon video for May of 2020. Here we are with a new moon in the middle of this crazy period of time in all of our lives. And the new moon is in Gemini on May 22nd, 2020 at, let's see what time, 1:38 p.m. So it's the middle of the day is the new moon. I know a lot of you do that little new moon ritual that I encourage people to do, and really you'd be better off to do it tomorrow morning or sometime during the day tomorrow. You don't really want to do the ritual right when these two are super close together. The sun just kind of takes over. We want to give the moon a little bit of time to take a breath and get out of the beams of the sun, so to speak. So with that being said, let's just talk a little bit about the phases of the moon. The moon phases start with the new moon, which is this one. This is the very beginning of the process when the sun and the moon are in the same position. And we go from there. A week later, we come to the first quarter phase. So basically the way I think of it is at the new moon, you plant a seed. At the first quarter moon, a week later, you best be watering it and taking some action to grow whatever it was that you planted at that new moon. At the full moon, you stop and you have a full view, a full illumination of what has occurred during that 2 weeks. And then a week later, at the third quarter moon, you begin to release the process to prepare for the next new moon. It's also, so, it's a 1 year cycle. It's also a full 6 month cycle where you'll be looking at the new moon, the full moon in Gemini, which happens 6 months later. So that's just kind of a quickie. That's what the moon phases are about. And so Jenny, I know you've been doing a lot of looking at this as a moment in time, this particular new moon. And I'm real curious about how you're thinking about it and how we can present that in a way that makes it easy for people to understand.
Yeah, those are good questions. It's a kind of a little bit of a funny one because it's a new moon in Gemini. So right away, we're in Gemini season. So we know we're headed towards summer. So Gemini is that final stage of spring before we get into full summer. And so that's one thing to think about. But normally with Gemini, we think of chatty and transmitting information. I kind of think sometimes of like a brisk wind, like whipping through a parking lot and picking up a piece of paper, that's kind of the energy of Gemini. And normally that's mostly what we would focus on. And those things are still valid. But what's funny about this new moon is, first of all, it's our first new moon right after a bunch of planets went retrograde. So we've got Pluto was already retrograde. And then just very recently, Jupiter and Saturn and Venus are all retrogrades. So now we have this retrograde part of it. And then the other thing is a big Neptune influence on that day. That kind of, so instead of having this sharp, bright, scintillating Gemini energy, you kind of have this more diffuse kind of, like what's happening? It's much dreamier and perhaps more idealistic, or there's this real struggle to have clarity. And usually with a Gemini moon, like you're going to have clarity. And this time it's just not quite that way. So
Right.
interesting things to think about.
Let's, while you're talking about this, I want to open up the chart so people can take a quick glance at the chart for the actual
Oh yeah, look at that
moment of that new moon.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
yeah. So for folks looking at this chart, this is the chart for the two of us here in Vermont. So the placements might look a little different, or would look a little different depending on when you are or where you're located. Sorry.
Right.
But anyway, that being said, so take a look up at the top of the chart. There's the moon and the sun together at 2 degrees of Gemini. So if you think about the moon being a weaver or going on a journey, think about what that moon contacted before it brought all the information to the sun.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, so the first big thing it contacted a couple days before was at Uranus and Taurus. And then from there, it was fused with that for a brief moment. So it started with picking up the signification of Uranus, which you could say is a bunch of different things: rebellion, change. It's in Taurus, which is the sign of Mother Earth. So those are the types of things I tend to think about. And then, so picks that up, it gets a message from Uranus, and then the next thing it does is it trines, it sextiles Neptune. So you see Neptune there at 20 degrees of Pisces.
Yeah, right there.
So that's a harmonious contact to Neptune. So it's picking up a message, I think, about bigger imagination, spirituality, dreaminess, those sorts of things. And then it contacted Pluto and Jupiter and Saturn.
by a trine aspect. Yeah.
Yes. So by a harmonious aspect. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the moon was moving along here. It bumped into Uranus, and then it sextiles Neptune, and then it trines these planets. Okay.
Yeah. So just don't go too crazy with thinking crazy about it, but just in terms of it contacts Neptune, so it's a bigger picture. Then it contacts Pluto, which is this idea of empowerment. And then Jupiter makes it bigger, Saturn stabilizes it. So it's bringing all of this information, which in current times is, one way you can look at it, as information about coronavirus, and our society and the shifts that we need to make, brings all that to the sun.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And then we plant a seed with all of that understanding. We plant a seed to what? To understand more in Gemini?
Yeah, but because it's got such like that dreaminess to it, the deeper layers. What do you think that means, Laurie?
Well, it's really interesting. I'm not sure. I tend to think of these things very simply, and you're going a little deeper into it than I do. But one of the things that I'm really aware of with this new moon is the fact that right shortly after the new moon, it's going to square Mars. So that and Mars is in Pisces, so it's very dreamy, and it doesn't have the kind of sharp edges that it would in another sign. And then the fact that at the same time, this Mercury and Venus retrograde are squaring that Neptune. I think there's, as I hear myself talking, I'm like, this is kind of confusing to me. Part of it is exactly that, Neptune is in the mix. We are trying really hard to understand what's going on in the world, and yet there's this lack of clarity with all that connection with Neptune. So, I guess for myself, I do try to keep this level of astrology as simple as I can. And I think, we need to plant a seed of understanding what is below the fogginess. It's a seed we're planting. We want to understand what's beyond this confusion, what's beyond this total lack of clarity of where we find ourselves right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think a lot of times that you could think of Gemini in shorter term, quicker actions, but I think this one is asking us to think bigger, just like you're saying, to what is beneath the surface, which is not usually what you're being asked of Gemini, but I think that when you are.
I think that's absolutely exactly. Yeah. Normally it's just about information and communication. And like you said, something getting swept off by the wind in a parking lot. Yeah. It's that kind of quick moving energy. But right now it's slogged into this Neptunian mysterious space that we just don't have clarity on. And yeah, planting a seed to develop clarity, I think in 2 weeks maybe we'll get a little view of that. And yeah, yeah, be careful
Yeah.
what rabbit holes you're going down.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And think a little beyond what you normally might think of how to adapt to these changing times is
right.
really the question here.
Right. I think, yeah, there's so many mysterious rabbit holes that we can fall into, and we really need to gain clarity. And it's not going to happen immediately, but hopefully at some point we'll get some of that. I think I below this in the video, the notes, you're going to find some writing that Jennie has done about this that I think is, for those of you who understand and are following this stuff, read this, because I think it's really, really important. What else do you want to say about this, Jennie?
I think we've covered a lot of good ground with it. I think my only other question is maybe just a quick reflection on what seeds you and I might plant and where this is impacting our chart, and encourage people to look at their own charts, find out what house this new moon is happening in, and that'll help point you in the direction of what seeds you want to plant.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, I'll go first.
Yeah.
For me, it's happening in my 10th house. So it is about career, and I really am at sort of this funny little juncture in trying to, and part of it is because that Venus retrograde is happening right there in Gemini as well. So there's a lot of, and you'll find for yourselves, whoever you are, whatever house holds Gemini, there's a lot of activity going on there in terms of trying to understand what to step forward in that area. For me in the 10th house, it's like where to put my feet really right now at this juncture of my career, where to gain some clarity. And yeah, what my values are is what's being negotiated with the Venus retrograde. And yet with the new moon, it's like, okay, plant a seed that is intended to build clarity on what steps to take in terms of what my newly processing ideas of my values are in that area. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah. So what about you, Jennie? What house is it in?
Well, mine's a little tricky because it's in the 12th house, and the 12th house is much like the other things you were describing of like, I'm not quite sure how to explain this. It's kind of confusing because the 12th house is a difficult place to explain. But it is the place of surrender in our lives. And it's, I think for me, I'm being asked to do some deeper foundational work as I'm getting ready to really launch my blog and some other things with astrology. And I'm just finding myself having to look a bit deeper into some of the things that tend to be obstacles. So that's really what I'm seeing. And yeah, it's hard to say, but
it's hard to say. Neptune, yeah. It's not easy to find the clarity, but find where Gemini is in your chart. And I think it's really a powerful statement that this new moon is happening in the same sign, therefore with whole sign houses in the same house that Venus is retrograding in, because we are digging deep into what our values are in this area of our lives and what seed you want to plant in building your understanding of that area. That's powerful, powerful stuff.
All right. It really is seeking information. So
yeah, seeking information, right? Information that will bring clarity. Yeah. Okay. So thank you, everybody, and be sure to read what's in the show notes, or wherever you watch this video. Be sure you read. This is actually going to be on Patreon, so it'll be with the video, and be sure to read that. Take the time, look in your chart, find out where that Gemini new moon is happening in your chart. Do your new moon ritual with this level of understanding. Okay. Thank you, Jennie. Thanks, Laurie. So much. All right.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.